Action News. Now, your table is The following is a presentation of 13ABC Action News. Now, your table is ready. Join 13ABC's Jeff Smith with the decision makers of Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. This is the Roundtable.
And hi there, good Sunday afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Roundtable program. Of course, we are 50 days and counting or so until the November 6th election. And we are just coming off the heels of the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. And here locally, 13ABC Action News, proud to bring you coverage right there on the floor. We want to invite into the Roundtable this afternoon for you our Washington Bureau Chief, Jacqueline Policastro. She is joining us via satellite this afternoon to talk about that experience down there. Jacqueline, welcome to you here on the Roundtable.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's talk a little bit about just kind of your initial impressions coming off of the convention, and obviously so much pomp and circumstance behind it. But when you get down to the brass tacks of the politics, what was your sense walking out of both conventions?
My sense is that Ohio is important, and it's not that we didn't know that before, but now it's evident from both parties. I actually read a viewer comment today that struck me. Someone wrote in saying, hey, you know, if the election is so important in Ohio, why not just forget about all the rest of the states and let's just focus on Ohio? We'll have the election there. And of course, that was a cheeky thing to say, but it's very telling right now. You saw both sides of the aisle focusing on our state.
You know, in years past, we have seen the emphasis be put on states like Florida. I remember watching coverage 12 years ago now, and it was Florida was going to decide the election. Now, are you starting to see the writing on the wall that it may be Ohio come November 6th?
There's no question. Absolutely. The writing on the wall, forget that. I mean, it's out there. All you have to do is a simple Google search of Ohio and election. And there's so many people writing about this and talking about this. And it's evident there, especially at the conventions. You can see Ohio center stage. It's funny because the state should be a little bit more important to Republicans, but it actually played a little bit higher up on the scale for Democrats. I can tell you that at the Democratic convention, even just during the roll call, certain states gave up their right and moved to Ohio so that Ohio could be the state to formally announce Barack Obama's name for that formal acceptance there leading up to that. You heard the president specifically mention Toledo in his speech. You heard Bill Clinton talk directly to Ohio, and of course a lot of the big state names also played front and center there at the Democratic convention. On the Republican side, we did have some big politicians making big speeches. Ohio had a great spot on the floor right there in the center of the stage, but definitely it's Ohio this time. Forget Florida.
You know, and it was one of those things too. You and I were talking before we did this interview today. We were talking about John Kasich's speech, Governor John Kasich, for the Republican National Convention, and obviously the Democratic National Convention. You saw former Governor Ted Strickland get out there, who was, for lack of a better word, an unbelievable cheerleader during his speech. And I said at times two things struck me: his volume for one, but also kind of the cadence that you saw. The first question I wanted to ask you is Ohio's weight. We keep talking about the importance that Ohio plays, but on the floor and walking around that convention, both the Democratic and the Republican in Tampa, did you feel kind of the importance that Ohio carried on the floor?
Yes, absolutely. You could see it within the delegates. There's something that's really important about all of this. The delegates that attend these conventions, they are the most plugged in politically in their communities, and they're really taking their job very seriously. They're the people that are going to go back into the community and talk to other people, their neighbors, their friends, whatever it might be, people at church or in the supermarket, and they're going to be the ones that are rallying to get other people to vote for the candidate that they want. This is really grassroots campaigning. You could see the energy there, but there's something I have to mention about Strickland. There's basically a Kasich-Strickland battle playing out here, and it's very telling because it's also leading into what Romney and Obama are talking about as well. Everyone wants to take credit for the slight recovery that you see in Ohio. It's greater than other states, right? But no one knows which governor to give the credit to. And it's also playing out there between Obama and Romney, because Romney's trying to make that case to people in Ohio that they need him to get the economy back on track. But Ohio is one of the states that's doing a little better than others. But either way, when you talk to people on the ground, they're still hurting. And it's Democrats and Republicans, not a partisan thing. But it's harder for Republicans right now to make that case that they need Mitt Romney in Ohio because of that slight bump in the unemployment numbers and just overall economy. Of course, that takes us into the auto industry as well. One of the things that the president is pushing so hard on those voters in Ohio.
That was one of the things we're talking this afternoon. We appreciate you staying with us. We're talking this afternoon with 13 ABC Washington Bureau Chief Jacqueline Policastro. She just got back from not only Tampa, but also Charlotte, the Republican and the Democratic National Conventions. And Jacqueline, I was wondering, as you mentioned the auto bailout and the continued talk about that, and obviously that is a key reason, wouldn't you say, why Ohio is being talked about so much in every conversation. You said you heard from the delegates, you saw the candidates, everybody was going back to the manufacturing jobs.
People are fired up about this, and it's something that's easy for both the candidates to throw front and center, especially because you have Romney, a Michigan native, in this issue. I can tell you that at the convention, some of the loudest voices were coming from those auto workers, and some of the biggest political names were the ones speaking directly to them. You, like I mentioned, heard the president say in his speech, Toledo and Detroit, of all the cities in the nation, they picked ours to talk about. And, you also hear it from Mitt Romney. It's tough here because there are some analysts that look at Romney's proposal at the time of the auto bailout and say it might have wound up working out almost the same with the plan that Romney had versus what the president wound up putting into law. But there's no way of knowing that. So it's going to be that issue that is just front and center. And you even saw a local woman from Toledo up there on stage talking about her struggle losing her job in the auto industry. She was plucked, handpicked by the Obama administration to make that speech, and she is from Toledo. So, yes, this will be one of the biggest issues.
In fact, she had just introduced the president a couple of days earlier at Scott High School back here in Toledo. You and I had discussed just the impact that these speeches have, and I wanted to get more of your read for our viewers this afternoon. You said it is emotional at times, which you don't always see that in the 10 p.m. coverage from a national perspective, but you said there were a lot of emotions on both sides, both in Tampa and in Charlotte. Why was that?
You know, this is a tough time for a lot of Americans right now, and I think that the people, again, that are at these conventions are really plugged in politically. I was on the floor during Paul Ryan's speech and turned over to people from his home state. They were literally crying. I mean, men with tears streaming down their face. It's not really anything I had seen, even in 08 or in 04 at the conventions. And then, on the Democratic side, I found that the delegates there were even more emotional. Tears all around for many of the speeches. I think that it's their way of connecting there. Again, these are people that are paying very close attention in their communities to what's going on.
You know, the other thing, Jacqueline, you and I discussed before we came out here today, you said the Medicare debate has played out quite a lot in the national media. And one thing that struck you was how many senior citizens, while you were down in Florida, were actually jumping on board with Paul Ryan's message, not the Democratic Party message.
Yeah, it was something that did strike me. A lot of senior citizens I talked to, without even really fully looking at this, jumped right behind Romney's VP pick, despite all of the health care talk. And I can't explain that necessarily, but something else that they sort of told me is that they felt like he brought a lot of youth and energy to the campaign. I think it gave them a way of feeling excited about their candidate in the same way that a lot of younger voters feel excited about Barack Obama. And I think it gave them some hope that they might be able to grab some of those youth voters, some of the voters in my generation that, last time around were definitely on board with Barack Obama. And those are the voters that he's looking for right now in Ohio, because in 08, that margin was was bridged between Obama and McCain by black voters and by young voters. And so he wants to keep those voters and grab onto some Republicans as well. That's why you saw Joe Biden, in the Republican areas of the state in the past few days on that weekend trip he made. He's not just looking for the voters they had last time around. He's trying to grab some extra voters. And those include some of those older voters right now that are on the Republican side that did like that Romney-Ryan pick.
And Jacqueline, I wonder if you get a read while you were down there as far as the social issues are being talked about so much from the national media, and especially here, we hear and you and I have discussed economy, economy, economy. Do you think that wins out over everything else?
I say yes. Right now, that wins. When the economy isn't doing well, it affects most families throughout the nation. It's the most important thing. That doesn't mean that social issues don't count. But what I found when talking to voters throughout the nation, especially these Ohio voters, is that it takes the really strong right-wing voters and the really strong Democrats to care a lot about those social issues. They're the ones that put the most stock in that. So it's not that they don't matter. You saw even that religion debacle play out at the Democratic convention. It wasn't originally in the party's platform, and it got put back in by the president, but it didn't happen without any controversy there. So social issues matter. There were a lot of protesters that I saw mostly at the Democratic convention, not as many at the Republican convention. That could have something to do with the security issues surrounding the perimeter. The Democrats had a much more open convention, but social issues, I think, are definitely taking the second ranking this time around for sure.
And obviously, you're giving us a read as far as the delegates are concerned and what happened at those conventions. What do you expect over the next few weeks when we get a little bit closer to these debates? What is the pulse of Washington right now heading into these debates?
Well, I have to tell you some sad news here from Washington. The pulse is that not a lot is happening here except for what's happening on the campaign trail. It is politics in the Capitol as well as on the campaign trail. I can tell you that, these issues that you see coming center stage with the economy are going to be the ones that are going to be talked about, of course, at the debates. And then you're going to see a lot of talk on foreign policy, because I think Democrats are really going to try to paint Mitt Romney as a guy that doesn't understand that well or can't do that well. You're also going to be hearing a lot about these polls. It's interesting because Barack Obama was favored in most of the questions on most of the polls, even the silly things like, who would you rather take to dinner or eat dinner with? And so he really did come out on top after these conventions in the polling, but you're going to see the attention on Ohio. And you know what? I have a number that I looked at earlier today that was shocking. It's $112 million in TV advertising in Ohio alone. That is 1/6 of what's spent throughout the entire nation. So if you need an indicator of how important you are, there it is right there.
And not to be left out, obviously, our neighbors to the north in Michigan and how important that state is plays into all of it. It isn't being handpicked as a swing state per se, but obviously with the automobile industry so ingrained in the glove state, if you will. A lot of importance there and a lot of money being spent as well. Jacqueline Policastro, we appreciate you taking some time with us here on the Roundtable today, and fantastic coverage from you and also Ted Fioraliso, our Washington Bureau Chiefs there in D.C. for 13 ABC. Continued good luck, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thanks kindly. Take care now.
All right. And stay right there. We'll have another segment to come. We'll talk a little bit more about the United Way and its kickoff program here in the Toledo area and a new leader at the helm. Stay with us.